Chapter 4. Sightseeing. Tika couldn't help but giggle at the way Avaline's eyes expanded as they stepped into the street corner bakery. The interior was a warm and inviting space, with sunrise yellow walls, polished hardwood floors, and large windows in the front that let in plenty of natural sunlight. It was quiet inside, with only a scant handful of patrons nibbling away at their pastries and sipping and accompanying drinks at tables along the edges of the room. Just ahead, a woman stood behind a dark wooden counter with an open book in her hand. Tika grinned. She knew that woman. She lifted a hand and waved.
"Irene!"
she called. The woman blinked and lifted her eyes, brushing back a lock of her long, wavy black hair. She smiled and crossed her arms.
If it ain't little Miss Woodpecker herself,"
she greeted with faux dread. "Come to nibble up all me crumbs, eh?"
"Muffins, actually."
Tika corrected without missing a beat.
"Two, please. One for me, one for my friend here."
Irene gave Avaline a quick glance, quirking a brow.
"Don't think I've seen you around before, lassie. From under, I take it?"
she asked casually, already striding into motion for a nearby basket set atop a shelf behind the counter, where an assortment of muffins and other delectable pastries lay waiting. Avaline tensed.
How do you know I'm from Archshade?"
she questioned, surprised. Irene snickered good-naturedly.
"'Cause your eyes look about ready to pop from your skull and run circles around my shop like it's the first of Tuna's bleeding bedchambers, that's how."
She explained before coming back to the counter, 2 plain muffins in hand. She set them down on the countertop.
"All right, Woodpecker, you know the drill."
Tika nodded and skipped forward, happily depositing a handful of coins onto the counter. Irene swiped them up without missing a beat and stepped back, letting Tika take her prize.
"Thank you kindly, Woodpecker. Always a delight." "Thank you,"
Tika chirped before quickly running back to Avaline. She held out one of the muffins.
"Here you go."
Avaline eyed the muffin for a moment, then took it in her hands. She cradled it awkwardly and reluctantly, as if she had just picked up a field mouse and was afraid it would go scampering off, or just bite her, if she made a wrong move. She frowned.
"It's kind of lumpy, isn't it?"
Tika giggled, pulling the wrapper off of hers.
"Maybe a little, but here, let me show you,"
she said before pulling the muffin in half, careful not to spill any crumbs on the floor. The inside of the muffin was a delicious yellow color, interspersed with patches of shimmering dark blue.
"Blueberry muffins." Irene knows me so well.
Avaline mirrored the motion, pulling her own muffin apart. She inhaled briefly through her nose, blinked, and then breathed in again, deeper this time.
Oh, Suna's breath, that smells good,"
she murmured, her eyes glazing over slightly.
"See? And if they smell good, imagine how good they have to taste."
Tika declared before tossing up one half of her muffin and catching it in her beak with a quick and audible snap. The blueberry flavor mingled with the richness of Irene's signature dough on her tongue, and she was unable to contain a delighted shiver and chirrup. Granted, she played it up a little bit to try and sell how good these things were to Avaline, but only a little. Avaline hesitated for a moment, then took a bite. She chewed thoughtfully, and her face lit up, her eyes flying wide. She looked down at her piece of muffin, and before Tika had a chance to tell her to savor it, Avaline had practically torn into the thing with the ferocity of a half-starved wolf. A few crumbs fell for the floor, and Tika was quick to duck and cup her palms, muffin and all, to catch them. She had no desire to let crumbs get all over Irene's doormat. That would just be rude. Far too soon, Avaline's muffin was gone. She stared down at her empty hands with a look of profound dismay, her fingers curling in on themselves over and over, as if doing so might manifest a new muffin. Tika took that as a good sign and stood back up.
So, did you like it?
She asked, already knowing the answer. It was at around this time that Avaline realized she had an audience. She turned a furious shade of red and lowered her head, some of her hair falling in front of her face to hide it from view. She awkwardly shifted in place for a few seconds before giving a quiet murmur of an answer.
Is there more?
Tika's grin couldn't get any wider. She scarfed down the remains of her muffin, then turned to Irene.
I think we're gonna need the whole basket.
Avaline's eyes widened.
Wait, what? No, that's too much. You don't need to spend that much money on me.
She protested. Tika clacked her beak.
Avaline, come on. After seeing you react like that? Besides, I can afford it. Don't you worry. Great,
Irene said, then pointed a finger at the door behind them.
I think you could get out of me doorway, though. Cute as the two of you are, me other customers can't get in.
Tika blinked. She had completely forgotten that they'd been standing in front of the door this entire time. Turning to look, sure enough, there was someone standing there. A tall and tired-looking man with his arms crossed. He quirked a brow. In your own time? Tika laughed awkwardly. Behind her, she heard Avaline swallow heavily before whispering,
Thank you, Tika.
Once the two found a table with their basket of blueberry muffins, the awkward tension in Avaline began to fade away. She took her time to savor the muffins after the first one. She still protested here and there that Tika had blown too much money on these treats, but Tika kept reassuring her that it was fine. She was supposed to be showing Avaline around, showing her the sights, and making sure she had a good time. She had the coin to spend, so why not? And speaking of showing Avaline the sights, the bakery was far from the only place she had in mind. She had no idea how much time she was going to get to spend with Avaline today, and she planned to make it count. And so, as soon as their muffins were downed, Tika all but dragged Avaline out into the busy streets of Underbridge. They meandered through busy market streets, where merchants and travelers hawked their goods to the shuffling masses from under the shade of colorful canopies. They passed through a beautifully maintained public space where neatly arranged evergreen trees flanked flagstone paths that wove between artificial ponds. They visited a historical monument in the city that Tika knew basically nothing about, but it looked cool, so she thought Avaline might like it. And all the while, they talked. About this, about that. Trivial, mundane, unimportant things. But with every word exchanged, every little joke told, and every quiet laugh shared, Avaline warmed up more and more. And Tika felt warmer as if by proxy. There was something strange that Tika noticed, however. Everywhere they went, if there was junk on the ground or some bit of discarded debris, Avaline would waste no time in picking it up and carefully tucking it away in a satchel at her side. Eventually, the two stepped out onto a less crowded street near the western city wall. It was starting to get late, the sun plummeting for the horizon. Avaline started.
Oh my goodness, is it that late already?
She asked, turning to face the sun.
We haven't been out and about that long, have we? It is autumn,
Tika pointed out, unable to hide her disappointment.
Sunset'll sneak up on you.
Avaline grunted, deflating on the spot.
Right. I guess so.
She lamented before shaking her head and turning back to Tika.
I should probably be getting back home soon, then. If I'm late, my dad's going to roast my hide.
Tika felt herself withering with disappointment. There was still so much she wanted to show Avaline, so many little hidden spots or nifty shops. She especially felt bad because she knew that Avaline had to return to Archshade, where there was almost no sun and almost no ring. But time waited for no one, no matter how much she wished it would. But then a thought came to her. She drew herself back up, a tender smile on her face.
Well, do you think I could show you one more thing?
She ventured timidly.
We still have a bit of light left, and it isn't far.
Avaline turned to Tika, looking her up and down as if in search of something. After a moment, she seemed to find it and nodded.
Well, all right. As long as it doesn't take too long. What is it?
Tika grinned, delighted.
Oh, you'll love it. But it's a surprise. Come on, follow me.
She said before turning and breaking into a run down the street. She heard Avaline gasp behind her, and she heard the girl's shoes clacking against the stones.
Tika! Wait up!
Tika turned around and ran backwards so she could face Avaline.
We got no time to wait up,
she cawed back.
Just think of it as a race. I did not agree to a race,
Avaline protested.
but Tika did not miss the spark in the girl's eyes.
Now, Tika was not typically a competitive sort. She hated any kind of confrontation and would cower away at the first sign of conflict. But here, right now, oh, she was feeling bold. And so she clacked her beak and threw her arms out wide in challenge.
Nope, but you're in one now.
Avaline picked up the pace, letting out an adorably exasperated laugh.
Oh, all right, fine. It's on, Woodpecker,
she called, recycling Irene's nickname for her. It was at around this time that Tika realized that she may have made a terrible mistake. Avaline was closing the distance very quickly. Squawking, Tika turned forward and ran as hard and as fast as her hollow-boned legs could carry her. Avaline was hot on her tail feathers the entire time, and Tika had to push herself to her physical limit to stay ahead of her. She took the familiar turns as sharply as she dared, leading Avaline closer and closer to the wall. They emerged into an old town square of sorts. But instead of a fountain, lamppost, or some other ornament in the middle, there was an old, run-down stone tower. Tika focused on it and put on one last burst of speed. Right as she was about to reach the tower, she dug her feet into the ground and threw out her hands.
Oof!
Tika grunted as she barreled into the stone wall, and then squeaked when Avaline slammed into it beside her. Both of them were caked in a layer of sweat and gasping for breath. Tika turned to Avaline and smiled.
You're fast,
she complimented. Avaline nodded.
You're pretty quick yourself.
She took in another deep breath and then grinned.
Oh, and, by the way, I win.
Tika balked at her.
What? No, you don't. I got here first. But you didn't give us a countdown. You just started running,
Avaline countered.
and I was still right on your tail the entire time. If we'd started running at the same time from the same spot, I absolutely would have won that race, so I win.
Tika opened her beak to try and counter the point, but found she had nothing to offer. So she pettily cawed in Avaline's face. That'd show her. Avaline cawed right back at her, and Tika gasped, a hand flying up to her chest in a mockery of shock.
How dare you!
She exclaimed.
The audacity of this girl!
Avaline rolled her eyes and lightly thumped Tika on the arm with a fist.
Just admit it. I won,
she said. After a few moments of puffing up indignantly, Tika folded her arms over her chest and let out a defeated whistle.
I guess it was kind of unfair of me. Fine, you win.
Avaline clapped her on the back.
There, see? Was that so hard?
Tika grumbled irritably. And then they both started laughing. Short of breath as they were, the laughter was weak and brief, but still, it felt good. Once the laughter died down, Avaline looked up at the tower. She put a hand on the stones, her brow furrowing.
Is this what you wanted to show me?
She asked curiously.
Kinda.
Tika said before gesturing for Avaline to follow her.
Come on, this way.
Avaline shrugged and followed as Tika led them around to the other side of the tower. An old wooden door sat there. Some of the boards that made it up had long ago fallen away, including the one that would have housed the lock. Tika pushed it open with a low groan and led Avaline up the spiraling stone staircase to the roof. Holes in the walls provided shafts of light, pink and red, to match the coming sunset. At the top of the stairs was a ladder that led up to the roof. Giddy with anticipation, Tika climbed up first, then held out her hand to help Avaline up. The wind was stronger, and the air was a touch cooler up here. Avaline sheltered her face with a hand as she got to her feet. Tika spun around to face Avaline and folded her hands behind her back.
This is what I wanted to show you,
she declared, then spun around with a flourish to gesture at what lay beyond. Avaline lowered her hand, and her eyes widened. She took a few steps forward.
Wow,
she breathed, a hand drifting up to hover over her heart. It was an understandable reaction. The upper city of Underbridge was already high above the ground, but it was a rare thing to be able to appreciate the view of the surrounding landscape with the walls of the city in the way. But on this tower, the view that lay beyond was not just unobstructed, but enhanced. For miles upon miles, the rolling green fields of the southern crater heartland stretched out before them. A patchwork grid of farmland surrounded the city, and beyond that, far to the west, one could just make out the hazy peaks of the Skijaramaz Mountains. Fluffy rolling clouds drifted through the sky, and the pale ring shimmered brilliantly overhead. In Tika's opinion, it was breathtaking. And judging by the look on Avaline's face, she felt the same. Avaline walked forward until she reached the stone railing at the edge of the roof and leaned against it. Tika came up to her side, staring out at the expansive terrain beyond with a small smile. After a few moments of silence, she turned to Avaline.
Well, what do you think?
She asked.
It's beautiful,
Avaline finally managed to say, her voice low.
I've never seen anything like this. Told you you'd love it,
Tika said, looking out at it all again.
I come up here every so often. Usually when that yearning thing I talked about creeps up on me. I'll feel like I don't belong where I am or uncomfortable in my own skin. When that happens, I come up here. It's the highest place in the city that I can reach.
She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, savoring the high-altitude wind on her face and over her beak.
This high up, feeling this wind, it makes me feel like I'm flying. If I spread my arms out, then for a bit, just for a little bit, I can pretend that the sky is mine.
Avaline hummed quietly beside her.
I see. I have a little ritual like that too.
Tika blinked and turned to Avaline curiously.
Oh?
Avaline nodded and reached into her satchel. She withdrew a fallen green leaf, a long stray stone, some twigs, and a few pieces of string. Wordlessly, she began to fiddle with them, and Tika realized that Avaline was making something just as she had done when they first met. Tika watched, fascinated. Avaline's hands moved with a precision that rivaled Tika's work on enchantments. As she worked, Avaline began to talk.
Like I told you before, we have a lot to worry about down in Archshade. We don't get a lot of light from the sun or the ring, so without that light, we don't get a lot of greenery. No big trees, no lush bushes, just mosses and mushrooms, half of which would kill you if you ate them. So it's not a very colorful place. Just the brown of the dirt and the gray of the rock hanging over our heads. It's grim in the summer and freezing in the winter. Every so often, trash from the arch will fall down to Archshade. It can clutter the streets, and sometimes they bring diseases with them.
At this point, Avaline had affixed the leaf to the bottom of the stone and was now attaching the various twigs to its sides.
There are so many problems everyone faces down there. It's not an easy existence. So, we've had to learn how to find happiness and beauty in otherwise ugly things. It's why I whistle the way I do. And it's why I do this.
The last cord of the string let out a snap as Avaline finished attaching the second set of twigs. She held it out for Tika to see, revealing that it was a crude but recognizable attempt at creating a craven. Tika blinked and gingerly took the simple craft into her hands to study it better.
So you make crafts from trash?
She asked, astonished. Avaline nodded.
I do.
Tika turned the craven over in her hands a few times. She pulled very gently at the leaf that served as the tail and smiled.
Wow. That's... I love that. It's kind of like what Brad and I do.
Avaline's smile faltered.
In what regard?
She questioned. Tika looked up at her.
Brad and I are enchanters. We take mundane objects like a lantern, a lockbox, or a doll, and we give them magical properties. But you?
She passed the makeshift creation back into Avaline's hands.
You take mundane stuff no one else would give a second thought about and find the magic that was already in them.
Avaline blinked, and Tika realized just how incredibly cheesy that sounded. Flushing, she coughed into her hand.
I mean, not literally. I was being metaphorical or something. It's still cool.
Avaline rubbed self-consciously at her left arm, a timid smile and a hot flush on her face at the praise.
That's really sweet of you to say, Tika,
she said quietly.
Thank you. Really, that means a lot to me. You're welcome,
Tika said quietly, then turned back out at the landscape stretching out before them. She took a deep breath, savoring that crisp, fresh air. The two remained like that for a while, not saying a word and simply enjoying the sunset and one another's company. Avaline began to whistle. It was a melody Tika knew this time. She had heard bards playing it from tavern windows as she passed a few times. She didn't know the lyrics, but she didn't need to. Happily, Tika began to whistle along. If Avaline minded the unprompted duet, she didn't show it. The two whistled their tune for a few short minutes, but they felt far longer to Tika and just so wonderful. It wasn't a perfect harmony, but Tika didn't care. When the song ended, Avaline took a step back from the railing. The sun was kissing the horizon at this point, and Tika knew they were out of time. She turned back to Avaline, smiling sadly.
I guess it's time for you to go, isn't it?
She asked softly. Avaline nodded.
It is, yeah.
She lamented. She affixed Tika with a warm smile. Before the Kraven had a chance to do anything, Avaline stepped forward and gave her a quick hug. Tika squealed in surprise.
I had a lot of fun today, Tika,
Avaline said to her.
Thank you for showing me around.
Tika took a few seconds to respond, as her brain was currently in the process of dismantling and reassembling itself in a vague approximation of sentience. She returned the hug a moment later, relishing the contact and bathing in the warmth Avaline's body radiated.
I had a lot of fun too,
she said quietly.
When do you think we can do this again?
Avaline pulled back out of the hug, frowning.
I don't know, actually. Probably not anytime soon.
Tika felt her heart twist a bit, but she was quick to rein in her emotions.
How come, if you don't mind me asking? The Deepwater Festival is coming up soon. My father and I run a stand in Archshade during the fair to make some extra coin on the side, and I'm going to be busy preparing for that for the next few days,
Avaline explained, rubbing at the back of her head. Tika slapped a hand to her forehead.
Oh, right! The festival! I completely forgot about that!
Avaline snickered at the reaction.
Yeah, that. You don't celebrate it, do you? Oh, no, I do,
Tika replied, quickly shaking her head.
I've just been too busy thinking about the lecture today to worry about it, and then I was all distracted spending time with you, and it totally slipped my mind.
Avaline blushed again and looked away.
I'm distracting?
She asked quietly.
In the best way,
Tika quickly emphasized. A few seconds passed. Avaline nodded and turned back to Tika.
Well, again, thank you, Tika. But I need to be going now. Do you want me to walk you home?
Tika nodded, a weaker smile on her face this time.
I'd love that, thank you.
Avaline returned the smile, and the two walked side by side back to the ladder. They left the tower in silence, tired from the day's events, and Avaline took the lead out of the building, holding the door for Tika. They'd been walking back toward Bradigan's workshop for a few minutes when Avaline paused.
I just had an idea,
she said. Tika turned to her to see a sparkle of inspiration in Avaline's eyes.
Huh? What is it?
Avaline turned to Tika fully, the pair coming to a stop in the middle of the road.
Right, so I can't leave Archshade for the next few days, but if you're free, maybe you could come down for the festival? When Dad and I run out of things to sell at our stand, I could show you around. There's all sorts of attractions, games, food, and there's a big dance in the center of town.
To say that Tika liked the idea would be like saying fire was a little warm. She squealed and hurled herself against the human in another hug, this one far tighter than before.
Oh, yes, please, I would love that!
She sang before pulling back to look into Avaline's eyes.
But wait, will your dad be all right with that?
Avaline nodded.
Probably. My dad's got a threatening beard, but that's about as intimidating as he gets. He'd love to meet you, I'm sure.
Tika grinned.
Then count me in! Deepwater Festival, here we come!